So we're going to start investigating what I squared is. So to start, we're going to use our calculators to simplify the three problems at the top. I'm going to grab out my calculator. I'm going to type it in exactly as it appears. So parentheses square root -4 parentheses squared, right? And I get back -4. Right, I'm going to do the same thing, but now I'm going to make it a -7. Right, I get back -7. We move this out of the way and we type in that last problem. Right, we get back the -100.5. Right, so basically what this shows us, right, is that, right, the square power and the square root, right, they're opposites, they just cancel each other out. So square roots, right, and square powers cancel each other out. Right, so what does that mean for I squared? Well, we want to remember that I is defined to be the square root of -1. So when we go to do I squared, right, which is really the same thing as saying I squared like that, we can really replace I with being the square root of -1. And we know based off of our three problems up top, that pattern it's following, the square power and the square root are going to cancel each other out. So I squared is equal to -1. So that's our really important learning information right now. I squared is equal to -1. Right, so we're going to always replace I squared with a -1, which basically means that I squared should never be in your final answer because we can simplify it further. So we're going to use that idea when we go and talk about some multiplication ideas. So we're going to multiply the complex numbers below, and we're going to make sure to fully simplify our answers. So what we're going to start with is distributing. So we're going to take 2i, and since it's touching the parentheses, we're going to distribute it to both parts. So we're going to do 2i times 8, and then we're going to do 2i times -3i. Right, just writing it out. If you don't need to write it out like that for a distributing process, right, you don't have to. Right, so we know that 2i times 8, well, 2 times 8 gives me 16, and then I'm going to bring the I together. Right, down here, right, I can take, right, 2 times -3, it's going to be -6, and then I times I'm going to get I squared. Now we know that I squared is really going to be equal to -1. So we're going to make this -6. We're going to change I squared to be -1. And we're really going to get -6 times -1, which is 6. So when I go to put together my answer, I need both parts, the 16i and the 6. And the best way to write our answer is to always put the regular number first. So we're going to get 6 plus 16i. When we go to do number 30, we're going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to write it out a little bit different here just to show a different way to show your work. So I'm going to take my 5i, right, and I'm going to distribute it to both parts. So I'm going to do 5i times 3, and then I'm going to add it to 5i times 7i. Right, showing our distributing that way. Right, so 5 times 3 is going to give me 15. I'll bring the I down. 5 times 7 is 35, right? And I times I is I squared. Then all we're going to do is whenever we see I squared, we're going to replace it with that -1. So we're going to get 15i plus 35 times -1. So we're still going to have 15i, and 35 times -1 is just -35. And then we want to make sure that we write it in the correct order. So we want to make sure that we know that the 15i is positive. So when I go to rewrite it, I'm going to write it as -35 plus 15i. You want those symbols to stay with the appropriate number. Okay. So right, that's distributing with an I, but we can also FOIL with an I. We can do binomials. So a complex number times a complex number, we can use the box method or the FOIL method to multiply, just like when we did with binomial multiplication. So I'm going to use the box here to multiply. So for the first one, right, I have 7 plus I. I'm going to put that along the side. 7 plus, I'm going to make it a 1I, right? I'm going to show that 1. Right, I also have 4 plus 2. Let's make that a different color. So 4 and then negative 2I. Right, and then we're just going to multiply anything that's touching on the sides of the two boxes. So we have 4 times 7. That's going to give me 28. Right, and I can write it out in case we need to. Right, then we're going to do the 7 times the negative 2I. Excuse the bell in there. So we got negative 14I. Right, so then we're done with the 7, and now we're going to distribute the 1I. So I'm going to do 1I times the 4, which is going to give me 4I. And then I'll do 1I times the negative 2I. So 1 times negative 2 will give me negative 2, and I times I is I squared. So then when we go, we want to make sure we combine our like terms, right? So we have 4I and negative 14I along our diagonal, so we're going to make sure we combine our like terms here. So I'm going to start my answer with the 28, and then 4I minus 14I is going to be negative 10I, and then I get minus 2I squared. But I squared, right, is really negative 1. So I'm going to get 28 minus 10I, and negative 2 times negative 1 is really a plus 2. And then we're going to combine our like terms again. So we're going to end up with 30 minus 10I. So there's our final answer up here, 30 minus 10I. So just as a little reminder, right, I squared cannot be in the final answer. So let's do one more example for this note fit. If you want to try it by yourself, feel free to pause the video and try it on your own. So I'm going to take 2 and minus 4I, we'll put that along one side, and negative 5 minus 3I along the other side. So I'm not going to write out all the multiplication steps this time, we'll just talk through it. So 2 times negative 5 is going to give me negative 10. Right, 2 times negative 3I is going to give me negative 6I. Negative 4I times negative 5. So double negative gives me a positive 20I. Negative 4I and negative 3I. Okay, so negative 4 and negative 3 make positive 12. And I times I gives me I squared. Okay, so if we go and look for our like terms then, right, I have like terms along the diagonal. And then putting everything together, I'm going to get negative 10 plus 14I plus 12, but we know that I squared is really negative 1. We'll multiply it by negative 1. So we get negative 10 plus 14I minus 12. And then we'll go ahead and combine our like terms. Negative 10 minus 12 is going to give us negative 22 plus 14I. We'll go ahead and move that up to our answer spot here. And we'll put a box around it to show that it's our final answer.